So, how's the retired life treating you, Brandon?
Hey, hey.
Are you riding a mountain bike? Okay, I know I will have to talk mountain bikes with you sometime. I am a avid rider over the last 10 years and have spent 6 years as a mechanic. So we'll have
Oh,
to catch
that's
up on
cool.
that sometime.
Let's wait 2 minutes more.
Maybe try Vanessa. I think things are working fine on this end. Oh, it's because you haven't consented to recording. I see.
Oh, now can you hear me? I downloaded a
Loud and
new
clear.
Zoom and the interface is totally different. And there was this little bar at the top that was like, it basically asked for my consent. Of course, I didn't see it because it was like this big, but it just said like the host is not allowing anyone to unmute. And I was like, wow, this is going to be an interesting meeting. You can hear me now, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. Also, like Zoom is making my cursor really large, and I don't know why. It's like this big. Is that just my computer? I have Zoom on Ubuntu.
I was going to ask if you're on X11. Yeah, that sounds like something an app. I mean, I don't know if that's a Zoom thing or your machine thing, but that's something that applications can do in X11.
Yeah, no, when I move off of the Zoom screen, it gets small, and then I move on to the Zoom and it gets like really big. I've only seen that on a Mac when I shake the cursor and it gets like really, really big.
I use a 42-inch monitor at standard 96 DPI, and I have to use that to an embarrassing degree when I sit down at the
Oh
machine
my
and hit
gosh, do you
my
have to
cursor.
actually turn your head to like I like my monitors to be small enough where I don't have to move my head to look at like one side versus the other. Don't want to get neck pain.
Yeah, not as much as you'd think. We get started first.
Yeah, let's start the meeting. So I put one topic into the agenda. It's next steps for the working group, because we merged proposals so far, and there is this idea to kind of record some videos about the proposals and throw them to other communities that they can express their own ideas or feedback about the proposals itself. That the idea is coming from Vanessa. So, and I thought over that about over the weekend, and I showed these proposals to a few people, and the feedback I got so far is like those are different approaches to different problems, and proposals are hard to comment in context of other proposals. So I wonder, before we reach any external communities or we reach I don't know, TOB review, I wonder if we shouldn't first consolidate our own proposals into one. Like if we should kind of come with agreement about like one proposals for that, and then roll out to everybody else. What do you think?
Well, wouldn't the goal be to help us narrow down at least the features of proposals that are most interesting? So it would be, I mean, the task we're trying to do is to come up with one unified proposal. So I think it would be hard to do that first. I think, let's see, to kind of step back, when we look at our use case document, if I were to go out and share that with someone, even that uses containers, they would be kind of foreign. Be like, what is this registry? I'm not familiar with a registry maintainer, or, you know, am I an image author? And I think we need to think about the use cases in a way that is digestible by, for example, someone in industry, a scientist, like a more less kind of in our jargon, if that makes sense. And then I think what would make sense to do is to have a common set of just really simple questions that we can answer, like on a high level. And maybe we would have a shared introduction about like, this is the working group. This is what we're trying to do. Let me give you an example of what the future might look like when we do this right. And okay, now that you know that, and you have this in your mind, now let's go through sort of like the abstract technical thing of what that picture of what that might look like. And then we can go into kind of the detail. Then we can ask them like, okay, so what does this artifact look like? You know, and then we can kind of go into the details. And what we might think of doing is trying to consolidate our proposals into that common structure, but present it in a way to the listener, like here's one idea and two different ways of doing it. And what do you think? Here's the pros and here's the cons that we see. What do you think? And to step back, because I proposed this idea, I'm worried that we are like, we're baking cookies. Maybe we're making chocolate chip and Brandon's making oatmeal raisin. But then we're having like a bake-off contest, and we're also the judges. And it's hugely biased, right? It's hugely biased in that like the proposals that come out, of course, we're going to kind of be pushing for the things that we want. And I think it's really important that we do at least try. I think it's part of the responsibility of this working group to try to get a larger set of opinions and feedback about what we have. And as part of that, we do need to put it into a format that's digestible for those communities. It's not, because so far we've been like, oh, look at, proposal C on GitHub in this pull request. And maybe if someone goes there, they're like, I don't know what any of this means. It's like, it looks like a bunch of JSON stuff in terms that I don't understand. And so we need to get into the terms that other folks can understand too.
I get your idea, I think at least, but the problem is we don't have, we have two proposals. I'm talking about proposal B and D that solve slightly different use cases. We cannot go to community and tell them, okay, we have one problem and two proposals that solves that. We have a little bit different use cases. And for example, you propose to put a graph on the schema level. I propose to put a graph on the spec level. And both of that have different use cases, because the schema level is mostly for the interest group when they create their own schema. And it's kind of responsibility of the working group on the interest group, sorry, to maintain those graphs. On the spec level, on the other hand, you have users that just maintain their own graphs, basically, which are influence those graphs by application requirements. So it's a little bit different use case. And I'm wondering, I mean, I'm worried that if we right now roll out this to community in this form, then we will have a chaos, because we will have people not understanding what we are trying to achieve in here. And I think maybe they will be, for sure, they will be also biased to their own requirements and so on. So if we drop this to community, I would expect that they go through the requirements, they read proposals, and basically they review the proposals itself and maybe propose something new. But I think it's not gonna help us right now to create one big proposal out of this what we have. Maybe not big, but consolidate. So I would basically from here put this into voting, like on the Slack channel, for example, who wants to roll out this right now, who would like to wait and see what we can do with that. I additionally reach other people to get also feedback, like I told Bjorn, Phil, Toru Komatsu, and one more person I forgot, to go through the proposals and share their opinions, what they think about that. So I would at least wait for those guys to express their opinion. I'm not against rolling out this to the community, but I would be kind of careful in here about the next steps, because first, from my experience, it's very hard to get attention from the communities. If we do it once in a wrong way, it will be a disaster, because the second time we will not get their attention. And when we are trying to kick out this group, kick off this group, not kick out, sorry, English.
Get out of here, you.
So it was really hard to get attention in different industries and so on. So I think we should be a little bit more careful about that.
Yeah,
That's
I hear you. More strategic. And I agree. I think we've been largely avoiding the issue of the fact that we can't really agree within our small group about what main use case we're addressing. So I like that idea. Maybe the next step, I do think that community engagement's important, but let's push it off. So maybe the next step is to get some kind of other folks in the OCI community that have that expertise to step in and be like, okay, we're having trouble figuring out which use case we think is most important. Can you give us your feedback? And maybe we need a structured way to do that, as opposed to like, pinging in the Slack channel. I had a few folks ping me asking questions too. So I think there's interest, but I think it's just going to be up to us to like talk to people.
Yeah, I mean, if you have questions from this specific communities, I don't see a problem to, I don't know, show them and present them and so on. But maybe let's first reach OCI. Maybe we write a mailing list, a mail on the mailing list that those proposals are ready. Please review if you have time, and let's see what will happen out of that.
Yeah,
But
what if we like really called people out and we made just like a spreadsheet with their name and then like notes and be like, just add yourself here, and then they'll see that their name is there and they'll feel like they're doing something wrong if they don't give feedback.
yeah, we can write some Python script to send reminders. I guess Bjorn would like that.
Yeah, I'm coming out of a time of like being swamped with some time sensitive tasks myself, as well as, I mean, I'm sure if you look at like my GitHub contributions, they've fallen way off for the last 2 months. I've been dealing with some internal tasks, but I should be here a lot more consistently now. So hopefully I'll get to putting my thoughts to ink as Marcin has requested.
Okay, cool. So the final decision, I would say, let's wait, or do you want to put this under the vote? I'm talking about rolling out all of this stuff to external communities.
We should hold off on the
I
external community stuff.
Yeah.
And we should make a spreadsheet of people in OCI that we want their feedback on. And
Okay.
I think we should discuss here what exactly we want them to tell us. Is it going to be generic, like what do you think? And then they can, it can kind of be open forum, or is it going to be like, what specific features of each proposal do you like? What are the most important use cases? Which use cases are we, discussing that you don't think are important? Should there be like a list of specific questions to answer, or?
I would say first I would go with generic, that I would just ask people to, as I already did to some, to just review the proposals and express their opinions. And if there are specific concerns, maybe we can ask appropriate questions to those and find some kind of common ground to that, or see if we are basically doing the right thing.
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay. Okay, so I guess that's the next step for the working group to reach, to make a list of people who are going to give us some feedback.
I also think like not so much a task for the whole group, but going back to like 2 weeks ago when, we initially were getting into more of kind of like the bike shedding and kind of like personal discussion of some of the proposals. There's probably a fair amount of room there too for people. Like I'm so partially thinking to myself here, right? Because like Vanessa comes from a completely different role than I do. To talk through just even understanding some of the use cases people have and how some of the proposals meet or don't meet them on a more individual basis. Like I guess I don't think it's the kind of thing that like makes sense to tie everybody up for or have like a 1 hour call with everybody who's interested. But at the same time, like for those who are reviewing these proposals, like more discovery of the use cases that are not first class in their, mental model or experience probably is a good thing to work on in the background too.
Yeah, I
Okay.
guess my expectations are pretty low in terms of like the HPC community use case. I really want it to be the case so we can come up with something that addresses all these use cases, but I think it's gonna be really hard. I've been actively like developing things that do image selection, and this weekend I worked on the actual scheduling component, and I've been using a compatibility artifact, as I define it, as this external thing that has, whatever metadata that I liked, and it's very empowering and freeing. And if that doesn't go into the compatibility spec, then we'll just have to do a different thing. The great thing about OCI registries is that it has ORAS and we can push arbitrary junk there. So we'll just make our own thing and push it there. But it's a less ideal scenario that it's not sort of a holistic solution that the entire community can share. But maybe that's like a pipe dream. Maybe that's a really hard thing to do, given that they're so different in terms of what we need.
I mean, I think it goes back to like Brandon's original comment of like, this doesn't have to be an OCI thing. This could live anywhere, right? And like it's slash, it could be all things to all people or few things to few people. Like it's very much it's a tricky process trying to define something with maximum utility because I don't think ultimately you're going to satisfy everybody. There are going to be people around the margins who might have to, use part of it or none of it at all. And it's finding that balance.
Yeah, I think one of my concerns, and I can talk about like, for example, Kubernetes. So like Kubernetes, especially with the scheduler, like inherently hasn't been designed to be able to schedule like two very detailed specific topology. In kind of the conversation we had this weekend, like, okay, I want to know the topology of where different cores are with respect to sockets. I mean, Kubernetes is like, okay, I will care about CPU and memory, and also like it'll go through the scheduler in a single sorted queue, and then the kubelet can just be like, meh, I don't really think I'm gonna run this, so I'm gonna reject running the pod altogether. And my concern is that right now that's kind of the state of Kubernetes, but I do see evidence that it's moving more toward wanting more of an ability to specify these detailed topologies. So my concern is that there will be a future point when the things that sort of the HPC community is advocating for are going to be really important, but they're not there yet. But we're designing the spec today that we'll need tomorrow. And maybe it's not a big deal. Maybe we can just, when that time comes, we come back and we rethink it and we add more detail. That's definitely, maybe it's the right decision to do something simpler now, and then only change that when the larger community actually warrants it. Anyway, that's kind of what I've been thinking about.
But I think, Vanessa, when I read those both proposals, B and D again, in terms of specification, we are not so far. I mean, I agree with this schema idea. I have no problem to put the graph there, and the idea that every interest group creates their own kind of domain is fine by me. I think it's okay. And the format of the specification is also fine. But I'm missing this feature to have, as I presented, the graph on the spec level. I don't like to make this as much complicated as you. I mean, if you put additional graph into the specification, it makes it much more hard to read for normal users. And yeah, I mean, I'm trying to find some different solution for that, but it's very hard, as graph is ideal for that, you know. And I think it's not gonna be so big because the graph structure will be influenced by this, what you specify in the compatibilities. So I don't expect you will have like, I don't know, 10,000 or 10,000, 50 nodes there. Those are rather small graphs, at least from the examples I ran. I also thought about alternative that you have multiple artifacts to one image, that you have artifact with specification A for, I don't know, AMD, and artifact B with Intel or whatever. But it also brings a lot of drawbacks, like you have to repeat a lot of stuff and pull additional content. So I think in terms of spec, you will find a common ground, like maybe in some short time. But then we have to discuss about the implementation details, like, you know, this plugin architecture and so on.
Yeah, I already built that. At least for the one that's my use case. This weekend I added the creator plugin. So now I have a creator plugin for artifacts and for a node graph. So you extract the topology of your nodes and then you put that into a JGF. But anyway, that's a side point. And it's funny you say that because I have like the same view of your proposal, that the user looking at it is going to think it's too complicated because they have to think about graphs when they look at it. Versus the one that I have designed, there is a link to a schema, but that's not intended for a user to look at. That is intended for the tools to use to understand just the single, you know, flat list of metadata attributes that they've provided. And I actually think our two proposals would just be combined if you just allowed that schema to be somewhere, and then you also allowed someone not to define a graph at all if they didn't want to, if they just wanted some, you know, flat metadata attributes.
Yeah.
I think that, and I think also that is how it ties to Brandon's. Because, okay, so the one detail that we can't really consolidate, oops, sorry, I keep hitting my microphone. The one detail we can't consolidate is the fact that, like, we have an external artifact that needs to kind of be retrieved versus Brandon doesn't want that. Those are just different designs that we'll have to figure out. But at the end of the day, Brandon's adding sort of like metadata attributes, key value pairs of something. And so the simplest definition of what we're talking about, so let's say you remove the schemas, there's no schemas, it's just, I don't know, some set of labels that like the runtime knows about. You remove the schemas, you also remove, you know, the custom graph stuff because the person writing this thing doesn't have any complex logic. All of a sudden you have the metadata that Brandon was putting just, you know, directly in a manifest in our artifact. So there is like a transition. I see a transition between all of these proposals. And I think if we can come up with a flexible artifact that allows for something like that, then actually they could be used across those use cases. And really the hard point that we have to decide is just like having the artifact or not.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
The thing I do have to point out there is like the core Brandon's proposal, and, you know, correct me if I'm wrong here, Brandon, but I would say it is much more, it's less the metadata, and it's much more the fact that the metadata is in the manifest list, right? Going back to kind of that principle of,
don't pull another thing.
as a runtime, I want a label on the box. I don't want to have to like go get a separate, I don't want to have to go like shuffle my index cards to find out what's in the box. I want the box to be labeled.
I think
Yeah.
Brandon's on Brandon right now is in like a Hawaiian shirt, like having like a fancy drink with a little like pineapple. I don't know if he's actually here.
Brandon
He's
is on a
probably listening.
bicycle. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, he
he's
was
biking.
he was nodding and thumbs up in there.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow, that's awesome. Do they not have like pretty days out there common enough to like, so you have one and you're like, I'm taking off work, guys. The sun's out today. Like, this is a rare event.
So
Okay, Brandon's one up, thumbs upping.
speaking of this artifact for container runtimes, I also understand this concern. I mean, that container runtimes would have to download something additional and possibly execute some third-party plugins, and it has to be done in a secure way because it would run some external stuff. But I wanted to talk to.
I mean, uh, and just real quick, at least for me, like I think it's less the like potentially executing external code. Like I'm not really worried about that. It's not like in any sane world you would like download and execute arbitrary code based on some value from like, oh, this is how you interpret me, and it conforms to the plugin interface. Like you would have a certain set of known formats, and whether or not that's compiled into the binary or a plugin that's looked up like that is already pre-approved and installed, that's an implementation detail. But I think the concern is more like things being self-descriptive, and in a world where potentially the correct or ideal interpretation of an image couldn't be done without an artifact. Again, that's kind of like the runtime author objection is
Mhm.
ideally artifacts are add-ons to, but not necessarily 100% necessary for the correct interpretation of or at least that's my take of an image. So because we're kind of on that borderline between like, is it sidecar data or is it more or less integral? And for I think one use case of the artifact approach is to make it a sidecar, but another use case is like, no, this is integral, but I want to be able to like bolt it on to a container image that's supplied by a vendor, or I want to modify it or update it over time and use that, the whole I think Brandon described it as mutating the immutable approach to using artifacts.
Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, I understand. And I was wondering because not to change the default way how you do image selection, I thought if we could, over some kind of plugin mechanism, change the algorithm for image selection itself. So, for example, it would be up to the user to decide which way they want to do this stuff. If they would like to enable some image selection over plugin that does and download those artifacts and makes additional decision, that would be up to the user. And I was wondering about container D maintainers or Podman maintainers, what they think about this idea that optionally you could bring your own or kind of different mechanism for image selection. That would be the artifact way that Vanessa is proposing. Because I understand it would be hard to force this as a default behavior if you have an artifact to change the algorithm for that. But if users decides to do that because there is a requirement and he's doing this, he's aware of his action, then I wouldn't see a problem with that personally. But it's just a matter if container defaults, Podman and others would like to see this kind of hijack in their the way how you can choose the
So
image.
I think this was an unpopular idea that, excuse me, that I mentioned a little earlier on. I don't remember when, but is it a possibility that we can kind of have a little bit of both approach in the sense that we do decide there are core attributes that do belong in the image manifest list? And so those would be the ones. So to kind of step back, I did some early descriptive experiments and I found that there was sort of a minimum amount of additional metadata that would ensure that no matter what, like my container would run. So that was like, so I had kind of a weird setup, but part of the setup was that I was adding in a library from a different operating system on the fly. So one of my attributes was just like the operating system and version. So when I added like Ubuntu 2004 with 22.04, I got like a glibc, ABI errors, a mismatch essentially. That's probably not a real use case. So let me just say something like operating system and architecture. So there's this core set of metadata that I think it's even experimentally you can figure out is really important just for getting from like not running to running. And technically speaking, like that would be the definition of compatibility, because if it doesn't run, it's not compatible. And then after that, what I found is that when I added more metadata about, things that were important for my particular application, so for example, the MPI variant version, I saw improvements in performance. So for example, less variability with the runtime of this particular MPI application, but they weren't essential for compatibility. So what if that core stuff, the stuff that you absolutely need to be sure that your container is going to run, goes into the image manifest list, and then everything else where we want to kind of tweak stuff that arguably is more performance oriented. In the line between like performance and compatibility, there was a small discussion in the Slack about this. Like technically, like the more compatible something is, you are likely to see that it's going to be more performant because it's better fit for the system. But you can still run something that's compatible that's not entirely performance. But maybe that's where we draw the line. And then it allows to satisfy both use cases. And it means that the working group would maintain that core set of metadata attributes that we know are totally essential for compatibility, that it's likely that if you remove one, your container is not going to run. And then everything else can be put into artifacts for these sort of off-label use cases, for the plugin use cases, for a slightly different design. But the core design that the runtimes use of like, image manifest lists, look at the attributes, make a decision, that would still be supported.
I recall the discussion about that, and if I recall that correctly, there would be a need for some kind of rank algorithm, right? That you have to eventually come up with comparing which image fits the better way, and it's not gonna be anymore the first that matches, right?
So you're saying there needs to be an algorithm to look at the metadata
Yeah,
in...
the core metadata in the image index, that the algorithm would have to compare those.
I guess for those, at least for the features that I've looked at there, it's more of just like a matching thing. Like, it's an algorithm, but it's nothing sophisticated like that requires a graph. But maybe you might be thinking of the case that would, I guess maybe that's another delineating factor. If it requires some kind of algorithm, it belongs in the artifact. And it's really just the dumb like matching cases. Or maybe we could even squeeze in like less than or equal to or something, in there, ranges of stuff that would go in the image manifest list.
So if we define those core metadata for that, I'm just wondering what kind of metadata would have to come up, because we would have to think about different use cases and those would have to be generic enough in that case, right? And I wonder how we would come up with that satisfies every requirement from different communities.
They'd have to be super generic. And that would be something that the working group would have to kind of like take on to
I mean, I think it's kind of connected to what Brandon proposed, but we extend this with the core metadata stuff also. That we specify the list that we should maintain, right? That this is the issue that Joe mentioned in the past, that if you define on the image side some kind of attributes, you should select image over. How can you be sure that it's gonna be the same on the host for container runtime? Like you have vendor that prepares the images, you pull that, and you have to match the annotations that are running on the host that you have no control over. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm okay with that, to be honest, to keep some kind of, but we would have to be smart about that.
Actually, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Patrick.
Yeah, actually, I was sort of listening into this, and I mean, the simple use case sounds a bit like NFD to me, because I mean, it actually does what Brandon had in his proposal. It slaps on in Kubernetes, slaps on labels, a lots of them if needed, if necessary. So it's like basically just hardware and OS. And there's as you noticed, I mean, it's can't really describe any topology or anything fancy like that, but at least there is a bunch of OS and hardware labels that would appear, and it's yeah. And then of course you have to interpret the schema or whatnot to figure out that what actually would match, for example, NFD in a Kubernetes setting. How this is interpreted in some other environments, I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem, right? I mean, if I understood you correctly, if we come up with this kind of NFD stuff as a core, labels or whatever, that wouldn't work for others. There would have to be some kind of matching and translation. Those not generic enough. If somebody runs containers on OpenStack or anything different, then they would have to adjust to those labeling coming from Kubernetes. That's a problem, I think.
Yes, but I was like more thinking that from NFD point of view, it has a lot of labels, yes, but it basically boils down to AVX. It boils down to kernel options. It boils down to OS
Yeah.
version and whatnot. So the idea that
Okay.
that's a set of labels that actually
Okay.
I can even understand when I just read them, that would be sort of fine. I mean, if we get to this kind of level, then we can do pretty much one-to-one mapping between
Okay.
something that the spec says and something that NFD has figured out that, hey, this is here, and then we can match, and that's pretty straightforward.
I see. So
Like
it would be about having generic subjects for like NFD
yeah.
came up. Yeah,
Yeah,
I have
because
thought that.
NFD has come up with these kind of things. I'm not saying that we actually take exactly those things, but at least it's a good start because it's pretty basic.
Yeah, in the proposal, I wrote that probably as open containers group, OCI group, we should maintain some generic plugins, which is basically the duplication of NFD source. Basically what we have in here.
Yeah, or something. I mean,
Yeah, I
it's
prototyped that already.
okay, good. What was the
I
result?
gutted, I basically, so I found there's this little tool in Git that actually lets you take all of the history for particular pieces of a repository and move it somewhere else. So I was able to do that. And I did that with the pieces of NFD that were not Kubernetes related. So everything in source. And it worked pretty well. There's only one place in source where it actually looks for a Kubernetes configuration file, and it just puts out a warning when it doesn't find it. But aside from that, it moved very nicely, and I've been testing it. I've been using it actually. There's a lot of information there. I can share a gist of what it dumps out, but yeah, it's quite a bit. It's interesting because there's a lot of information. There were some key things that I wanted that weren't there. But I don't think that's an issue. I think the larger thing is that NFD may not necessarily be like the perfect tool for our use case right now, but I think a project like it and metadata like it could be something that we move toward, that we provide, and we will have to think pretty hard about, about the labels that we have and that we use and that kind of thing. But I don't think it's like an impossible idea. I think it's actually a pretty okay idea.
Yeah, I think you can at least previously you could extend NFD to do other fancy stuff. I mean, one thing I know for sure it's gonna miss out is like anything with HPC like MPI. I mean, it doesn't really care what the operating system thinks it's doing. It's just saying that this container runs this operating system and has that kernel. So
Yeah,
definitely, yeah.
and that the MPI stuff and the spec stuff and all the HPC stuff, that would go in a compatibility artifact. And like we are totally okay with that. I think as long, because then it would be like, okay, the image selection would have like these core kind of, node to image comparisons. But then in our scheduler, for example, we would pull in the artifacts and actually inform the image selection, because we could only put it on nodes that have kind of the details that we need. So I think these two things actually would work together really nicely, just in an indirect way.
Actually, one more question. You mentioned topology and stuff like that. How would this hop into the picture?
So that would probably come on, it sounds like right now that is not something of interest for kind of the image manifest list. And I agree, that is very detail oriented. That's going to make them very long. that would for us come in on the level of the scheduler. So the scheduler may have some HPC application that, I don't know, needs like a GPU near an NPI bus or has a particular pattern of kind of a core layout that it needs to most effectively run. And as long as that metadata is somewhere about the application, then the scheduler that also knows the nodes, has a view of the nodes in a graph that it owns, would be able to kind of filter down, sub-select a set of nodes that, you know, that could match that topology. Then it would, you know, dispatch the work to those nodes. Then the runtime tool, if there's containers involved, right? There may not be containers involved. Then it would choose based on that filter set. It wouldn't know anything about topology, but it would again be checking a higher level of compatibility.
Actually, as long as you have Kubernetes and run containerd or CRI-O, you have NRI to your disposal, and there you have the topology-aware plugin. So once the whole thing hits the runtime, it can actually, you can write a plugin that actually does all this kind of logic. It's in the discussion in the link. There was a stuff about it. So that means that the runtime doesn't actually know a thing, but it's extended through NRI, which then can actually go place the container suitably so that it's actually close to the CPUs or memories or whatever that is
Agree.
useful for this application.
The other half of the story, though, is that this same idea would function outside of Kubernetes on sort of bare metal HPC clusters that use the same compatibility artifacts, potentially.
Yep. That's, I think, is the trick thing here.
So, you know what? The next things I would do for this week, I wrote actionable agenda items that make a list of OCI people who should provide us feedback. I put you and me, Vanessa. We will come up with some Excel. I will put people I already reached, and I also will try to pull into the discussion about this image selections over artifact, guys from Podman, Containerd, and others. But I'm not sure about their timing, so it might be that during the week we would have to meet with them and explain the idea and see what they think, just to gather the feedback, what they say about that. So I will probably pull you, Vanessa, as well into those meetings, and I'm not sure if
that sounds fun. I like making new friends.
And I'm not sure if anybody else would like to join those meeting as well, because I guess those folks wouldn't like to join on Monday meetings because of conflicts or something. I'm not sure. So if you would like to join, then just ping me on Slack and I will organize something. But that would be the another actionable agenda items. Schedule. Okay. Anything else we have to discuss right now?
So just to clarify, you'll share like a Google sheet with me or something, and we'll throw some names in there. And okay, yeah, exactly. I can do that.
Phone numbers, mails, and then we can chase
social security numbers. So you don't have to. Just kidding.
So yeah, that would be the next steps. And for next time, if we have 3 slots, I would start talking about the specs, that how we could basically join the ideas of proposal B and D, and we will await for feedback from others. But I think we can try to consolidate the ideas.
One spec to rule them all.
Yes, exactly. So if anybody doesn't have anything, then I will just close the meeting and we will have some.
Yeah,
15
we'll actually get out early today.
Yeah. Cool. No dramas. Everything is fine today. Let's meet the next time and continue. Thank you, everybody, and see you
Sounds
next
good.
time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.